Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Martin Poulsen. Welcome to the Corporate Investor Panel. For those of you who have attended the first session with the forestry presentation, you'll have apocalyptic images of fires in your minds. This panel switches gear, and we know those are all reality, but this panel switches gear, and we're going to be discussing the flow of corporate investments into forestry and biodiversity, and a range of issues around that subject, including how corporates invest, the role of carbon markets, the way in which climate change and biodiversity is driving investments. We're looking at the social aspect as well, more and more important in people's understandings, amongst other things. So welcome to the panel. My name is Martin Poulsen. As I said, I run a business called Acacia, Sustainable Business Advisors. We provide advisory services to forestry, agroforestry, agricultural, and oceans-based SMEs or fund managers targeting those sectors, as well as DFIs and other public institutions active in those areas. Thank you very much to the organizers, Warren and company, for inviting me to be the moderator of this panel. I've got a very interesting panel who are going to introduce themselves in a moment. We will do the short introductions in a minute or so. We will then move things on with some questions that I will put to the panel, and just to get the conversation going. We're very keen to have your input through the chat, so please don't be shy with questions or comments, either things already on your mind about the role of corporates in these sectors, or things that come up as you listen to the comments made by the panel members. So please do put those in there. I will try and break about halfway through this hour. We have an hour for this session to specifically take questions that audience members may have put. And if I see something pop up in the chat, which fits well into the flow of the conversation, I'll just draw it straight into the conversation then. So please do use the chat function for your questions. With that, on my panel this morning, this afternoon or this morning, depends where you are, I have got, and I'll just run through the names now, and then I'm going to ask each panel member to do a short introduction. So I've got Martin Forsen of SilviPar, involved in the management side of the business, the forestry management side of the business. Marie Veyrier of the Global Shea Alliance, a supply chain oriented organization. She'll tell us more about that. We have Flora Ji of Shell, Richard Boomer from Forbiom, active in Eastern Europe, amongst other places, I think. And then Hans Loth of Rabobank, which I don't need to introduce. So welcome to my panelists. Thank you very much for being available. As you can tell, this is not exclusively a group of corporates. We have different perspectives here. So the conversation will be a little bit broader than just corporates, but that remains at the core of what we're discussing. Let me pass over now let's ask Martin just to go first to introduce himself, and then we'll move through the panel. Martin, over to you, please.
Thank you, Martin. It's a pleasure to be here. So my name is Martin Forsen. I'm the chairman of SilviPar AB. My background, I'm a forester. I have an MBA from Stockholm School of Economics. I worked in the forest sector globally, mainly in Scandinavia, Baltics, and now latest Southeast Asia. Everything from silviculture to logistics to industrial processes. Most recent, I was the CEO of Burapa Agroforestry, which was a greenfield plantation establishment, and an integrated plywood mill and a small sawmill and furniture factory. And since 2 years, I've been working with our investment in Paraguay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. And we'll just keep moving through the panel. If I could ask Marie to please introduce herself.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. So my name is Marie Veyrier, and I'm the Development Director of the Global Shea Alliance, meaning I'm in charge of developing public-private partnership and raising funds into women empowerment, as well as protection of ecosystem and biodiversity and parkland restoration. The Global Shea Alliance, we are the industry association for Shea. We have about 700 members who represent the whole value chain. So we have women cooperatives, brands, retailers, suppliers, and so on. And we really view investment into biodiversity through like a partnership model with the private sector, in which biodiversity and environmental objectives goes on par with supply chain as well as operational objectives.
Great, thank you very much, Marie. And switching geography again, we've moved Latin America to Africa, now over to Asia. Flora, please introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. Very nice to meet you today. I'm Flora Ji. My background is more about business development, M&A, and asset management. I have worked in several countries, including China, the Netherlands, Kazakhstan, and currently I'm in Singapore. I'm now leading Shell's global nature-based solution business. We have a team of around 80 people across different regions in Asia, in Europe, also North America and Latin America. So back in 2018, Shell set up our global NBS organization. We're probably one of the very few companies in the private sector who entered into NBS space. And this is in line with our goal to support the Paris Agreement requirement to limit the global temperature rise. So over the past few years, I and my team, we have established a few flagship projects in Africa, in Europe. We also established platforms in Australia, in China, working on large-scale reforestation and regenerative agricultural projects. We are now running a funnel of opportunities in various countries in different regions. So it's my privilege to be here today. I very much look forward to the conversation, and I would be very happy to address any questions from the audience. Thank you, Martin.
Great, thank you, Flora, with perhaps the purest corporate perspective on this panel. Richard, could I come to you now, please? Would you like to introduce yourself and
on mute?
There you go.
Yeah, Richard Boomer. I was a co-founder of a company called Forest and Biomass you call Forbiom, that should have been called actually Farm, Forest and Biomass. Basically, the story is about 2005. We realized that with the coming of the bioeconomy, the problem of climate change, the dependency of Europe on fossil fuels, there was going to be a huge need for people to produce more out of nature. And we had no idea how to do it. Everybody's talking about biodiversity, sustainability, but what does it really mean? And so we decided to start a company. We raised $100 million and we bought 5,000 hectares of forest and 5,000 hectares of agricultural land. Because we see the issue of not being just planting one type of tree on one piece of land. You have to have a holistic approach. What is producing biomass? And for me, biomass is all organic matter. It involves as much agriculture as forestry. And when you plant energy crops, you've discovered that it's basically both, and it's not that easy to do. So today we produce around 50,000 tons of different products from timber to food and going to biomass, and we hope to increase that with time. We've built a great team, and we built this expertise in 10 years because it took us 10 years to actually build it. I discovered how difficult actually it was, how complex nature is. And when people talk about biodiversity and sustainability, it all sounds very easy. But when you're actually down on the ground, it's so complex. And this is where I think corporates have a big role to play in the future. And so, there's our story.
Great, thank you. And I empathize very much with those comments as a former manager and founder of the Moringa Fund, which invested into agroforestry projects. It's very much feel the same things there. Let's finish the introductions with Hans. Hans, over to you, please.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. Well, this sounds like a really nice, diverse panel. I'm really honored to be here. Good afternoon, good morning. My name is Hans Loth. I work at Rabobank. I'm the global head of the UN Environment Partnership that we have, which immediately sets the stage for the climate agenda that we as a commercial bank have. Rabobank is indeed just a commercial bank. There are many more. And we focus on food and agriculture. And the link to the topic of today is in essence the food system transition that we try to support our clients with. Because as Flora also mentioned, we are here to grow a better world together, which is actually a tagline in our strategy, and more specifically ties into the Paris Agreement. We need to obviously be sustainable in a financial fashion, which is what a commercial bank is about, but certainly also in an environmental fashion and in a social fashion. And more, that's part of the return equation that we are all seeking for. Building on what Richard said, in the end, trying to grow a better world together more sustainably is terribly difficult. What we try to do with our clients is to see in food and agriculture if they can produce more food for a growing world population, but with less CO2 impact, which is a perfect dilemma right there. But one of the enablers certainly is finance. And one of the other enablers certainly is de-risking, because in that journey to food system transition, there are many risks. And I think the panel today is very much aware of those, and we'll talk about them. And together with a fund called AGI3 Fund and UN Environment and FMO, a Dutch Development Bank, and IDH, a fair trade organization from the Netherlands, we've set up a fund to de-risk that transition, to de-risk loans to farmers, more specifically, that need to produce food, but more sustainably so. Let me leave it at that, and looking forward to the discussion and see how we can build bridges amongst this common theme of the Paris Agreement, biodiversity, and forestry. Thank you. Back to you, Martin.
Thank you, Hans. It's great. And I've got a very disciplined panel here today. Everyone stuck to time fantastically. Thank you. Let's get the ball rolling at this point in that case. And I want to ask a general question to the panel regarding the flow of corporate investments into forestry and also into the related sector of biodiversity. Is there enough of it? Where is it going? Where is it not going? And why is it going where it's going? And why is it not going where it's not going? Would anyone like to just make some comments on that, just to get the ball rolling? Go ahead, Richard, please. Yeah.
My first comment.
You're on mute again, Richard.
My first comment is say, no, there's not enough of it. We're nowhere. I mean, it's just starting. I mean, most industrials, most corporates I talk to have no idea what they're talking about. They don't know what nature is. It's still right at the beginning. And I just want to say that it's extremely important that corporates start getting invested in nature massively, because to be able to produce what we want to produce sustainably, it's a huge challenge. It needs management, it needs processes, it needs technology. And this is not there today. And the only ones that can bring it are the corporates, because institutional investors, they have the money, but they're not going to get involved in the operations and in the problems and down on the ground problems. So we need the corporates to be there to understand the processes to make sustainable whatever biomass, whatever food, whatever wood, or whatever products. And you know, there's a massive investment that needs to be done. And for me today, it's still very minute. Yes, you hear projects here in Africa and South America, a bit in Europe, but in reality, it needs to be massive.
Yes,
and
go ahead, Mary. Yeah.
To what Richard just said, in addition to having much more investment, we also need to look much broader and have a much more diversified investment. So for the moment, the few investment that is going is mostly going to forest and plantation. Yet in continents like in Africa, agroforestry landscape, so landscape where you have a set of trees, fallows, farmland, they represent the third carbon sink. And I feel that currently, we also need to look broader than just forestry, plantations, and so on, and analyze, you know, what are all the landscape what can they give us in terms of achieving targets in biodiversity, in carbon, in climate change mitigation, income also and resilience for local population, and really like increase the flow, but as important, broaden the scope.
Okay, excellent.
Maybe I can add, yeah. So, I mean, I mean, we've been doing these type of sustainable investments now since the team behind SilviPar has been doing it since 1999. And I mean, I have to add on what Richard is saying, that of course there's room for more, but I also have to see there is a clear trend that we're getting more and more interest from corporates. And I think it's a quite good timing now when we see this. I mean, compared to when we were raising capital 10 or 20 years ago, there was almost no interest from the corporates, but now it's definitely changed. So I do think we're heading towards something that is very positive.
Okay, so you see some momentum.
Yes.
Yeah, if I may, Martin, you know, we look at nature, and scientific study reveals that nature can offer up to 37% of the solutions Paris Agreement requires to, you know, limit the global rise of temperature. So from that perspective, the question is how to unlock the nature's potential to help us, the human society, to reach this goal, right? And what I would like to advocate is corporate and private sectors, we all need to embed nature as part of our investment strategy, as the philosophy of our investment. But the good news is, over the past few years, I personally have witnessed that more and more companies really start to do so. And there is also an increase in the societal willingness and societal awareness. Forums like this today can help to further boost the awareness as well. And in the recent, let's say, 12 months time, I see a lot of, you know, private sector companies, but also financial institutions, trading houses, they all enter into the carbon space. This is a positive signal, right? Because people see the potential in the market, the value in it, and they want to play a role to help really boost this potential liquidity of this space. But what we need to be careful then is about the quality and integrity of various programs we're going to put in place. Otherwise, it would be a very beautiful castle, but literally built on sand. So we all need to, you know, safeguard the potential development, tapping into nature and nature's potential. Yeah.
Great, and we'll come back to that, Flora, a bit later in this conversation in terms of the things that Shell is specifically engaged in this area. But maybe, Hans, just to complete this section here, this may be a good point just to say a few words about the Agri3 fund and its objectives. It's not a corporate investor, but it's a significant potential investor. So perhaps you could just tell us about the Agri3 view of this space and how you're engaging with it.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. Yeah, I think what I see as a common denominator here is that we see a funding gap. We do need more investment in forestry and biodiversity. I do believe it is not only to the private sector or the industry or the corporates to look at. So that's why we also incorporated Agri3 Fund, which is a blended finance vehicle that has donors, but also private investors blended together, if you will. And why do I say that? Because I do believe that for the private sector industry to scale up, they need to move to proofs of concept, which I think we're all doing in this panel and in this audience as we speak today, because this is very much moving from where we are BAU, business as usual, to a new reality. That means proof of concept. Investors never like that because it's risky and it's uncertain and it's difficult to put in an Excel. So that's why I think in essence, you also need the public sector and the governments to chime in and to de-risk during that proof of concept time, which is with a limit. It has a time bar. It shouldn't take forever, but it will need to be de-risked because our governance model is still very much so that we have shareholders, stakeholders that expect a return. And Agri3 Fund aims to de-risk that part of an investment. And without going into detail of equity or debt, because it's vastly different, But when you look at a loan, say normally 7 years, what Agri3 Fund actually does, to keep it simple, is to allow you 3 additional years to say, okay, if you want to make an investment into, say, forestry or biodiversity, into a more sustainable future in food and agriculture, you get 3 more years, because you will need time to try, and you will fail and you will succeed. As Richard said, it's hard work. So we're very cognizant of the fact that those 3 years you need to get, and who pays for that. And we believe that the public sector, and luckily some public sector investors with us, including the Dutch government, agree and said, okay, we like that storyline. So we're in this together with the private sector. So they crowd in more private sector investment. That's a little bit the business model as we aim to support the farmers in the supply chains.
Great, and a very important perspective. And you mentioned blended finance there, which perhaps we'll come back to a bit later. It's a subject very close to my own heart, and in looking to mobilize in a project for African Development Bank, mobilize more capital for African forestry, we put forward a blended finance structure to assist with that, which I think is part of the answer here. But let's come back to blended finance in a second. I want to come to Richard now. Biomass, Richard, is a key product of your plantations, not the only one, I think. It's something which corporates have a significant need for. Where does that fit into their investment plans for this broader sector? Where does biomass fit into their plans? You're on mute.
I did it again. Yeah, I think a lot of corporates will need to get into this, because biomass is, when I talk about biomass, it's a general sense. It means it's organic matter. It can be used for products, it can be used for energy, it can be used for chemicals, it can be used for a lot of things. There are so many industries that need to get involved because it's a resource that they're going to have to use. And so for me, biomass is fundamental. And the complexity is, how do you produce this biomass while keeping the food production and in the traditional forest products? And that's, I think not many people are asking themselves the question, because yes, you can transform a piece of land into a plantation, but you still need to produce the food on a global level. And so we have been trying to figure that out and finding the best model of mixing everything together. And also biomass is something, you need to produce it all year round. And people have one solution, for example, one tree or miscanthus, but miscanthus is harvested in March, and you have everything in one go. So you need to find ways to produce biomass all year round. And so it's a mix of lots of different things. And that's why we invested in the farms and the forest, to try to find out how we could have a regular flow of biomass on a local level. But it's a fundamental thing for the future. I think every company is going to somehow have to use some natural product somewhere in their mix, whatever their sector is.
Yeah, it's a great point. And equally from my agroforestry investing days, this idea that's obviously very central to what you're doing, of having other products being produced at the same time is a really important one.
Yeah, you need to know farming. If you want to produce biomass, you need to be a farmer, but you also have to be a forester, and it all goes together. And if you don't know one part of it, it's a mess. And I've discovered that over the last 10 years. Wow.
Not easy. Okay, thank you. And Marie, staying a little bit on the same theme, I just want to talk to you a bit about your work. You have a strong focus on West Africa, as you said. And you're working with corporates to extend their supply chains and make their supply chains more sustainable. How does that help? How does that help the corporates that you're working with? Why is it in their interests to engage with you on this?
So for me, there is an interest at 2 levels. First, on the operational level, as well as to meet their social objectives. So on an operational level, the Shea industry is an industry that has grown tremendously over the last 20 years. We have an estimate that exports have grown by more than 600%, but at the same time, the Shea tree population is declining. So trees are being cut because of commercial agriculture, loss of fallows, charcoal producing, and so on. So extending their supply chain into a new country, investing into the community, investing into reforestation and plantation, it's basically, from an operational standpoint, it's guaranteeing that they will be able to meet demand, and that one day, when their customer asks for Shea product, they will actually be able to deliver that. So that's the first objective. The second objective is more related to the characteristics of the Shea industry. So the Shea tree is a tree that grows naturally. It's not farmed, there is no input. It's traditionally collected by women. It has been used for centuries as a food and as a cosmetic product in Africa. So it has it's an industry that resonates very well with consumers' perspective and consumer demands to both food and cosmetic brands. So I would say they achieve two objectives in one hand, in just one activity. At the same time, they secure their supply and ensure they can meet demand. And at the same time, they respond strongly to consumer demands and requirements.
Okay, so really, it's more and more something which corporate agendas and shareholders require, that this is done better and more strongly, as well as, I guess, the fundamental economic benefits of doing this right. Excellent. Let's just draw out a little bit the lens. We've talked about some quite focused initiatives just now. Flora, if we can come to you. Shell, of course, is a very large organization, and you're involved in quite a range of activities as regards sustainable land use, including different asset classes that you're investing in or supporting. Can you just explain why it's important for Shell to be in these activities, and also why you've chosen the particular mix of ways of engaging with forestry and biodiversity as subjects?
Yeah, happy to do so, Martin. So as I mentioned before, the background of MBS and our birth in Shell is more linked to the Paris Agreement and the potential in nature. The company realized how this can contribute to the climate change, the tackling of that. And in addition to this, Shell as a company, we set the net zero emissions energy business goal by 2050 in step with society. And we realized that to achieve this goal, this requires, of course, decarbonization journey. All of these, avoid carbon emissions, reduce your carbon emissions. But in addition to this, there is also an element about the role nature can play on top of the transition of energy system. So from that perspective, then it's about nature, natural ecosystems. What are we doing about this? So what we do is we look into several natural ecosystems, including forest, agriculture, grassland, wetland, and also the coastal ecosystems, the blue carbon. And we invest in the development of these carbon projects, creating high integrity carbon sinks in these natural ecosystems, contributing to the environmental and social co-benefits, and then bring these high quality carbon credits to meet our and our customers' decarbonization requirement following the mitigation hierarchy of avoid, reduce, and offset. So this in a nutshell is what we do in Shell. However, as I mentioned before, when we look into the role nature can play, we realize that it's not purely about climate or carbon. It's a very complicated set of stuff, as Richard mentioned, and also Martin echoed. Nature is a sophisticated kind of ecosystem by itself. To make sure we get it right, we do it in a respectful, sustainable way. This will require all sorts of considerations about biodiversity, water and air management, and so on and so forth, local communities. That's why back to April this year in the Powering Progress strategy, Shell set the 4 goals. It's more about, first of all, we will look after the shareholder return, but we will also respect nature and looking after these elements, empowering local communities, and then contribute to net zero emission goals. So by all of these goals, it means that biodiversity, forest, sustainable forestry management, sustainable agricultural land management practices, and other similar type of approaches is very core in our fundamental investment strategy.
Great. And the mix, Flora, in rough terms, between investment into carbon credits versus other kinds of credits, and also maybe ownership of forests yourself. Can you just talk about how you have decided to, and what proportions, roughly speaking, you've allocated at this point in time to those different ways of engaging?
Yeah, so back to 2019, Shell made a commitment publicly that we will spend $100 million per year for the coming 3 years, literally from 2019 to 2021, end of 2021, in total $300 million to directly invest in nature and natural ecosystems. So we have been running several flagship opportunities and projects like reforestation in Spain, in Ethiopia, and we also did a project in Australia. We were in partnership with the Netherlands forestry department to plant trees there, and also in Scotland. In addition to that, we acquired a carbon farming service company in Australia called Select Carbon. So this is now 100% Shell subsidiary, and my son just invaded, sorry for that, and my cat. So yeah, this is a company which actually provides carbon service, end-to-end carbon service to about 70 projects in Australia across 10 million hectares. All of the farmers we work together with. In China, we established a joint venture with Climate Bridge, who has been in the industry for more than a decade, and they're working on a list of afforestation, reforestation, and also grassland restoration projects, roughly around 1.5 million hectares for the time being. And in addition to that, we also look into potential, equity ownership, either in assets or in companies, and we also provide financial support to help the project owners to take off, these projects. And as you all know, Shell has a carbon trading desk for about a decade. We operate in compliance market, but also in voluntary market. So in a nutshell, how Shell runs the MBS business is from 3 elements: supply, which is more about carbon credits generation by different commercial archetypes. The second part is about marketing and trading. And then the last part is about demand, which is about customer offerings, how to provide high quality carbon credits and bundle or unbundle with our energy products to provide to our consumers. Yeah.
Thank you. So there's actually quite a broad range of possible ways of engaging you have. That's yes. Excellent. And I think people will be very interested in that. I can see some questions starting to come in on the queue and on the chat, and I'll come to those in a second. We're about halfway through our panel, so now's a great time if you have got something you'd like to put to our panel, or just comments you'd like to make, to add those into the chat. But before we do that, Martin, as a forestry plantation manager with a lot of agroforestry in there, and also as someone, as you just said, who has been established for some time, and I think you can see some movement in terms of corporate investment into the sector. It would be great to if you could just talk about, in relation to Paraguay, and without focusing only on Paraguay, and this is a geographical question, what is it about that context which you think makes these projects investable, and particularly which would allow you potentially to draw in more attention and more money from the corporate sector?
Thank you, Martin. That's a very good question. Like I mentioned earlier, we've been investing in the forest industry and forestry space since 1999, and the main driver behind why we started this is that we see an increasing middle class around the world. I mean, there's estimate that it will go from 2.7 to 4.6 billion people by 2030. These people will increase their consumption. I mean, they would like to have 15 t-shirts instead of 1, just like we are. And I don't think this is something we can stop. So that's where we decided to go into this space with sustainable fiber and green energy. We started in Scandinavia and the Baltics, and it was quite successful. And at that time, we started to do some research. Where should we go next? And we We started a consultancy firm to look at over 100 different countries all over the world. Where is the best place to establish a sustainable forest industry? We did in-depth analysis of 12, and when we were done, we had found that what we believe is Laos and Paraguay are the two best countries in the world for a sustainable forest industry. And the reason behind this is, I mean, biological growth rates, annual rainfall, ENS impacts make sure that there is a need for this type of investment to raise the social impact in the country. We also have a very high availability of degraded land that it's underutilized at the moment, that we can then utilize to create benefits both for the environment and the people. So that's why we ended up in Paraguay. And it has so far shown, I mean, it takes time, like we mentioned. I mean, we've been doing this now in these two countries for over 8 years. And it takes time to, again, set the proof of concept to show that this works. And now we are in this stage where we are expanding. And since we have this long background, I also think that it's easier for us to explain to corporates and other investors how we're thinking and what we're doing, because we can show it in real life.
Great, thank you. And just going back to my opening comments, I suppose, about the risk presentation. For those of you who saw that presentation, you know, there are some climate change oriented facts which are concerning about investing in forestry. It's easy to look at the images of burning forests and be concerned. What are your views on how well the risk of forestry investment is managed there? It's a question to everybody, really. Martin, you're free to respond.
If I start.
You can also respond.
Now, I think, I mean, in a way to decrease the risk, you need to look at all the three legs of sustainability. I mean, you have the environment, you have the economic, and you have the social. And by doing that, making sure that everyone benefits from it, you're de-risking the project. And it's also a reason why we went into the sustainable and green energy space, because we know that there's a low risk of government regulations that will come against something that's actually a positive movement. And we also, if you have the local communities on your side and they believe this is good and they benefit from it, we also think that's de-risk the project. I mean, just as an example from our project that we have in Laos as well, if you get the communities against yourself, they will turn the plantations on fire, more or less. But making sure that you have they getting benefits, direct benefits, you're de-risking the project. And again, trees, in a way, I mean, we are going into emerging markets, but trees as an investment, since they continue to grow, even if you stop investing, it's also limiting the risk of the project, since they're multi-annual crop.
Okay, thank you. If there's no other comments on that particular subject, I'm going to go to the chat, where we've got a hypothetical case that's just been put, and it says, we're developing a commercial afforestation project of 1 to 2,500 hectares with scope to expand to 32,000 hectares in savanna and deforested land in Sierra Leone. What advice would you give, first in terms of approaching this project from a biodiversity perspective, how to integrate biodiversity into it, and second, from how to attract investors? Anyone care to comment on this? Mary, go ahead. Yeah.
Maybe so. First, a disclaimer: we, as a Global Shea Alliance, we don't work in Sierra Leone, but we do work in the savanna landscape in other countries. And I think my first advice would be really to define what would be the model of this land restoration with the surrounding communities. Are they going to be able to access the tree? How are they going to be part of the project? I think like community interaction and defining on how this restoration would work with them is really the first point to start. And then once they are engaged, all the choices in terms of which trees to put and so on should be made directly in consultation with the community, because this project is looking at only as from like a biodiversity and environmental perspective, but you could also see the opportunity of this project to develop income revenue streams for the communities. So are there tree crops, like for example, can you do baobab, moringa, and so on? Can you include buyers of these tree crops so that the communities directly benefit from the project? Look at other biodiversity enhancing activities like beekeeping that will help with the pollination of your plantation, and at the same time could be harvested for honey or made into beeswax that could be further sold. So I think that you really need to start from your community and how they are going to be engaged in the project and how they will also benefit from the project.
Thank you. So a strong emphasis on the social and also diversification of tree species and other things there, which I think chime well with Richard and Martin have been saying. There's a question here which I think may naturally move in your direction, Richard. You're also free to comment on this. How are you investing, promoting, positioning yourself in developing a circular economy model in biomass?
Well, it means recycling. I mean, the circular economy is trying to recycle. Obviously, if you burn the biomass, it won't recycle it very much. But there are ways of using biomass which are more intelligent. It's probably to use the biomass in cardboard or as a product, and then recuperating the product and burning the product after, if you need biomass for energy. And so, yes, we should try to figure out ways of using 1 cubic meter of wood many times through different products. There are possibilities, but it's complex because you need a lot of people together to understand and to work together. But that would be the ideal world, obviously.
Okay, great.
May I add just a quick tip? I think regarding a circular economy and biomass, I think nature does it perfectly by itself. I mean, it is a circular economy. I mean, the carbon in the trees, when you burn them, they are recycled into new trees. So it's already a circular economy by default. So I think biomass is an excellent choice.
Great. Anyone care to comment more on biomass or on the cereal cake before we move on? No, good. All right, I have a question, a general question for the panel, except for Hans, because I'm going to ask Hans to comment on this point after everyone else has had a go at it. But I'm just interested. I know you have different perspectives here, but I'm interested in what the panelists would say to someone like Hans. But we're talking more generally to the financial service industry. What is missing in terms of input from banks, from large financial services businesses, to allow investment to flow more easily into the topics that we have today, forestry, of course, with a biodiversity aspect to it. And those things may not just be dollars, but what do you need more of? What is the financial service industry currently not doing enough of to enable more corporate engagement here? If anything.
I can start. I somehow feel financial sector has already really started to do more and more in this space, and linking to ESG goals, how they manage their shareholders' investment and all of these management governance, etc. There is a tremendous role the financial sector can play. And if I may, I feel one area that we can even work closely together is really about policy and advocacy. When it comes to the land management sector, forestry, agriculture, and even wetland, grassland, coastal ecosystem, any of these natural ecosystems, it comes to the wide range of TCOP risk and reward any investor will look at, right? And the single reality today is for many of the countries, the legislation, regulation, when it comes to this space is not yet in place. So this will require more collaboration, especially linking to NDC, Paris Agreement, Article 6, and so on and so forth. A lot of work to be done. So if we really want to unleash the natural potential, then definitely there needs to be a more robust legislative framework to enable such investment to take place and to run in a sustainable way. Yeah.
Thank you, Flora. Any other points people would like to mention? Marie, yes, please.
I think in addition to that, forestry. So for example, Shea being a natural product, I think there is also a big need to invest into the surrounding SME ecosystem that is linked to the trees. So if you look at if you think about an agroforestry setting, you will have a number of tree crops, and most of these tree crops have their own value chain and have their own SMEs who trade it, who process it into food, cosmetic, and other products. And at least in West Africa, you have a big investment missing in these SMEs. They have difficulty to access working capital. They have difficulty to access investment capital. And I also think that if you make the ecosystem, the company ecosystem that is directly benefiting from biodiversity stronger, then ultimately you would also strengthen biodiversity and strengthen, a strong agroforestry setting.
Yeah, the issue is size, because you find that most investors want, you go and see them and they say, can you invest $50 million tomorrow or $200 million tomorrow? And you're saying, no, nature is not a 50 million or necessarily 100 million, as Marie was saying. It's not necessarily a huge investment, but most investors today and financial institutions want big scale projects. And I mean, the fragmentation of ownership makes it very difficult to actually do that. And I think that we have to find some vehicles that can be where they can invest in, where, that are not necessarily one huge projects, but multiple projects put together. And I also think that what's missing in the system today is that a lot of these finance institutions need corporates to be with them. And I'm coming back to that subject again, but the whole supply chain management, all the processes to control the quality, to control the sustainability, all that is something that corporates know how to do, because they can manage factories and processes. And this is what's missing in our industry, is that we need these big corporates that can reassure everybody that the systems are in place and the softwares are in place, so that you can bring then investors into these projects after. And it's this combination of both that will make it a success.
Great. Thank you, Richard. Maybe over to Hans in that case. Hans, how do you react to some of those comments? Do you also see those gaps or those needs? And you can answer from a Rabobank perspective or just from a general financial services industry perspective. What's your take on things?
Yeah, I think thanks, Martin, and thanks, fellow panelists. I think all earlier statements are spot on. To start with advocacy, I do believe we need to look at policies, procedure, rules, and regulations. Not to go into detail too much. Those are country-based, but we also need to look at central banks, because if we look at private sector banks, we tend to think they make choices on their own. They tend to be heavily regulated though. So choices that are being made by commercial banks tend to not be their own. So we need to look at how can central banks support commercial banks to reach impact at scale and to really unleash that private sector capital base. So I think that's one player that we haven't mentioned today yet that might be of value. And I think when we look at roping in the private sector, we need to look at de-risking. I think I've heard that today a few times and we all agree. And you can de-risk by finance, donor and grant money, but you can also de-risk by technology and de-risk by technical assistance, because often people don't know how. So there are various ways to de-risk. So that's one bucket. But if you want to build a business case, and I think Flora was also speaking to that, you also need a financial incentive. So what's the financial incentive for people, supply chains, corporates, but also farmers, people in the end, to make a change? Because we're all creatures of habit. So we need to think change management here. And that's a combination of a story that is compelling, but also a financial incentive. And often at the farmer gate level, that is lacking. So I want to make a very important link today with what has been said by Flora, which is carbon. We really need to look at carbon. Carbon insetting, carbon sequestration, all of the above, because that is not a magic bullet today, but has the potential to really, through kind of a discounted cash flow way of thinking, frankly speaking, to get cash in today. That could be the financial incentive for the farmer to change behavior, because the farmers are sitting on a carbon sink, as alluded to by Flora. And if they replant around their farm, it's even a bigger sink. So how beautiful would it be if you can get the cash from the carbon credit trading back to where it's needed, which is often near the soil, right? The soil or the trees, and make that link. And that link is lacking still today in an institutional repeatable level. If we can do that, I think that would be great, because then we are looking at de-risking, which I think we've spoken about, but also the financial incentive. Taken together, you've got a business case. Thank you. I think you're on mute, Martin.
Anyone like to react to that quickly before we move on to some more panel questions?
Yeah,
Flora, go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, Hans, I really want to echo on what you just said about the integrated value chain and different elements in this value chain. For me, that's very critical to the big success of nature and nature-based solutions. Maybe if I may, I just use Australia as example. You know, Australia is a compliance market. Australian government, they put in together this emission reduction forum is called ERF. And what they do is literally they develop a list of methodologies people can tap into, and this will help to literally generate Australian carbon credits unit. And this will be then sold to the ERF or traded in the voluntary market. The essence of that is it just links to the farmers' original activities in a very neat way. It doesn't stop the farmers from pursuing their crops, the crop productivity. What they do is literally change some management practices to enable, for example, human-induced regeneration, to work on other stuff, more like, you know, soil carbon projects, environmental plantation projects, and so on and so forth. And by doing so, the farmer will have additional revenue stream, which is the carbon revenue stream. So imagine a farmer now in Australia, they actually, you know, they probably among their total revenue stream, carbon revenue stream already plays a role of up to 30, some cases even 45% of their total revenue, bad years and good years. And then you have a more robust business, you know, for yourself. And that's why I somehow feel, especially when it comes to agriculture space, it's really about how to unify different parties' interests and leverage different ecosystem service to make that happen. And this somehow links to the question in the panel, which we can talk later. Yeah.
I would like to make a comment on the carbon and for investors and finance and the finance industry. In Europe, we've seen the price of CO2 go to, I see it on my screen now, 62.67. I don't think many people realize how much energy there is in wood. And I'm surprised often how people have no idea, but there's around 10 gigajoules in a fresh cubic meter of wood, if it's, let's say, hardwood. And so today, when you look at what industries, the last industries I've been talking to have been telling me that their cost of energy has gone up from €3 a gigajoule to around 10 or more. They're paying, let's say, 4 for coal or petcoke, and coal or petcoke, you need to add, if you're using it, you need to add, it produces around 100 grams per gigajoule. So that means you need to add, you divide it by 10, so the 62 becomes 6.2. So they're paying 4 plus 6, they're paying €10 a gigajoule. That's what they're paying today, and for probably coal, and for gas today, it's even worse. I mean, it's gone off the charts today. Actually, if you want a big source of biomass, and I'm talking about the region where we are in Western Romania, you probably have to get to 40, 50 euros. And as I was saying, there's 10 gigajoules. So you're talking about 4 or 5 euros a gigajoule to start motivating people to actually go and get the resources And so there's this huge opportunity for investors today to actually, and for corporates, is to actually, they're paying 10 for their energy minimum, and it's out there at 5. So there's some room today for some major investments from companies to start doing something really serious. And there's enough money in there to do sustainability, biodiversity, helping communities. And so it's an extraordinary moment, thanks to the increase in price of CO2. And let's hope it continues, because I think it will change our world. But I think that I'm amazed to see that there are so few people waking up to it. I think it happened so fast that I think nobody really realizes what's happening. And but 62 or almost 63 euros, I can tell you, is starting to change things. In the next few years, I'm sure that a lot of corporates are going to start panicking on their energy costs.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Some excellent points there. And we've got 5 minutes left. I've been harassing the audience to ask questions, so I feel morally bound to try and reply to these questions quickly. There are 2 that I can see, one from Sergio Figueredo, and he has said, we're supporting the transition from coca cultivation to cacao, which we all know, I think, in an agroforestry system with the Colombian government. What is the best approach to present this kind of project to investors? It's a very general question, but would anybody have some advice? I guess he's thinking about this from a biodiversity perspective, but how best to present this kind of project, which has a strong social aspect to it behind the general motivation here, how best to present this to investors? And it says actually it targets Flora and Martin here. So Martin, why don't you?
So I saw that, so maybe I should start then. I mean, my advice is usually that don't forget, I mean, I mentioned before, don't forget all the aspects of sustainability. Don't just say that we're doing this for biodiversity only, and then you forget the social aspect. I've seen cases where you build what I call a kind of a social museum because you're only focusing on one of the aspects. It needs to be an holistic approach with all of them, which it seems like it has, because it's talking about agroforestry and changing the behavior. So, and then you need to be able to present it that you can show who is benefiting and how. So it's not just something that you talk about, that you're donating money as a part of your CSR program to some format. It needs to be an integrated part of your everyday business, and because then it will work even when later on in the investment as well.
Great, thank you, Flora.
Yeah, so fantastic question. You know, given your question is more from the investor's perspective, now I would say maybe take a step back. What is the philosophy and what is the value you try to deliver in this project, right? And really make sure you have a holistic storyline about that and target the right investors who share similar kind of philosophies. Is your project more to aim for potential sustainable products, you know, from a food supply chain perspective? Do you want to also create more holistic picture about a more convincing story? This is a sustainable project with very good community program, leveraging the local communities to contribute, and how much we pay back to the local communities to support their alternative livelihood. What about the impact to the biodiversities and how scalable it is? Today, it may be relatively small. What's the future of that? And can we replicate this practice elsewhere? And if we manage to link all of this together, that is a fantastic case. Any investor would be interested to have a further look. And Sergio, do reach out offline. I'm very interested in it.
Great. Thank you, Flora. And I'm being reminded that we are now running down the clock. I've still got at least 20 questions that I'd love to put to the panel. Thank you all very much for such an engaging conversation. Some of the interesting points that I've just picked up, I've noted a few down, but you know, there's been repeated reference to the social dimension here, the importance of getting that right, partly as a risk management tool, the importance of improving the way the risk of our projects is managed, whether it's through finance, technology, TA, or some other means to get corporate investors more comfortable with this. I think there is a general consensus that there is engagement from the corporate sector, but not enough. There is still a big gap here and much opportunity which remains to be harvested, which was what Richard was just talking about with energy costs, I think. There's also been a consistent kind of thread about diversity in the plantations, not too much monoculture has some disadvantages, so trying to introduce some diversity through agroforestry and other aspects. The general trend towards sustainability is pushing corporates in the right direction here. There were some interesting comments that were made, and it's not just, let's say, finance which is missing. There are also aspects of advocacy and regulation and central bank involvement that can help to make the overall context here more appealing. And last but not least, the carbon aspect here, the potential is huge. I think also other payments for ecosystem services, we haven't talked about much about those today. There's huge potential there to also use those as a means of fueling and supporting the sorts of projects we've been talking about. So I think we're going to get cut off. Thank you all very much for this great discussion, and looking forward to the rest of the conference. And thank you to the audience for being with us. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.